So, the other big shift in 2018 is Chiron moving from Pisces to Aries. Now, I was actually going to do a long thing about Chiron and Aries, and then I looked quite carefully at what's happening with Chiron. And in fact, it's going back and forth between the end of Pisces and the beginning of Aries. So most of the year, it's got a long way to go. It's at 24 degrees Pisces now. It's got to go all the way to 2 degrees Aries and back again. So Chiron has a very weird wandering orbit anyway. Now Chiron is another controversial thing in astrology. It's only discovered in the 1970s, but astrologers started using Chiron right away. And what's interesting about Chiron is it has got a very, quite a long, it takes quite a long time in a sign, but it has different amounts of time in each sign, and its longest time is in Pisces. So it's been in Pisces forever, it feels like, for those of us who love Pisces. It's just been going on and on and on. It seems to manage to be both a personal planet and an outer planet at the same time. It's got a very strange effect, and it's what it does is it connects us. It's a connector to the outer planets. But it should never be read really as a personal planet unless it's absolutely doing something in your chart. What it does is it weaves together collective experience and personal experience in some way. Chiron is known as the wounded healer, and various books have been written about Chiron. And I think that we're actually still exploring Chiron, because one of the things that I notice is that this planet, minor planet, asteroid, expresses itself very, very differently in different signs, like wildly differently. Okay. The Chiron is, in my own chart, is very central, and I couldn't understand Chiron for many years. I didn't get it. Didn't relate to this whole idea of a wounded healer. Didn't understand what was meant by it. It didn't make sense until Chiron came into Pisces and started to activate in my own chart. Now this is something, there is a very good website on Chiron by somebody called Jeremy Neal, who writes very well on Chiron and seems to have a very deep insight into this. It's called Chironic. Does anybody else know this? It's called the Chironic Journal or Chironic something. He's really good. He calls it a Chironic awakening. Probably quite a few people have also experienced this, but I won't go into too much detail of my own thing, but simply to say that Chiron is to do with pain and suffering. That's why we have Jesus' feet, right? He's been in Pisces, and it's a bit, and what happened to me, just many things, but there are a few really ridiculously obvious bits of symbolism, which is I broke my foot. As soon as, pretty much, and I broke it like, I did it myself. It was self-inflicted. Then I broke my wrist. And then I had an eye operation on my left eye. So I'm completely broken on the left-hand side through this transit. Okay, that's just physical stuff. Yeah, that was just, but it really hurt. Much more than the Uranian baby I told you about. It really, really hurt. And that is Chiron. Chiron really hurts. There were just one other thing, and that's the physical stuff, which is in any kind of initiation. Chiron is about initiation as well, and it's initiation into, I want to say, into the occult or into something like that, especially in Pisces. Yeah, and in any initiation, you have to be broken. And another way that it worked for me, I'm just telling you this because I think it's quite a useful insight to how Chiron transits work. One other thing that happened was that one of my children was very ill, and this broke my heart as well. She's better now, by the way. But so it's broken in many ways. You get broken in many ways, and Chiron might not break your arm or your wrist, but it might break your heart.
Yeah, that's right.
You've had that with the Chiron transit. It's exactly, it's the deepest pain.
Terrible pain.
Terrible pain.
And it just doesn't move.
Yeah. So, but that also creates a Chironic kind of awakening because, and I'm sure some people are more like this, but I needed to be told, because it awakens your compassion in a much more real way, so that you are suddenly you're open down the left-hand side. Yeah, it doesn't happen, you know. And one of the things that I think is quite interesting about Chiron is that for some people it doesn't have, you know, Chiron doesn't resonate for them. There's no meaning to it, and the transit, nothing happens. Yeah, and that's what I mean about, in particular, Chiron is either interested in you or not, or you're interested in Chiron or not. And if it's interesting to look in your chart and see what aspects this Chiron is making, and that will tell you if this is, you know, if the transits of Chiron are important. And also, you will know from what I've said, you will recognize these already as painful transits. Okay. So I was thinking about that. I'm thinking, what does Chiron teach? Compassion also teaches you about your own frailty and weakness. Yeah, you're frail and you're weak, and actually, that's it. You're not going to get healed necessarily. So we have this, again, this is the hippie bit that I couldn't understand. The hippie bit is, oh, we're all going to get healed. No.
We have to accept that.
No, maybe we're not going to get healed. Maybe things are, this is the way it is. We have to deal with the wound and allow it to be like stigmata. So you wear your wound, okay? How come it's happening? Don't we fix this? Now, so, Chiron is going to, I hate you. Chiron is going to stay in Pisces until the 17th of April, and then it will be in Aries until the 26th of September, and then it will be back in Pisces at this end stage. Okay, so it's going back and forth. Yeah, so so we're still not out of this period of the end of Pisces, the end of something. So this made me, anybody born between 1967 and 69, you'll be having your Chiron return, right? And of 67 to 69, that's an enormous amount of time. But because it starts at 24 degrees Pisces and goes to 2 degrees Aries in this, your Chiron return is incredibly important, okay? Especially if you're involved in healing or you are doing something that is not the usual thing. Yeah, you're outside the mainstream in some way. It only happens once in your life, really, unless you live to be 104 or something. Your Chiron return is the real midlife crisis. You look back at your life and you see your failures. And that will happen to you. You will look back, you will see where you failed. And this may be okay, your failures may be small and fine, but it may be quite difficult. So it's looking back, and it's not with that honest thing that we were talking about with Pluto and Saturn. It's different. You feel it here. You know, Chiron, you feel right here. It's not looking back and thinking, oh, that was a failure. It's feeling it. So this is very Piscean, I think. This is the Chiron in Pisces, because I'm coming to the Chiron in Aries, because I looked back, and I was really surprised when I saw what years Chiron was doing exactly the same weavy thing between the very last sign of the zodiac, okay, and the very first sign of the zodiac. So we're at the beginning of a new age, or a new phase for Chiron. He's about to go into the beginning again. He's starting again, and he's finishing stuff off in Pisces, which is the last sign of the zodiac. It's the most collective. It's the sign of dreams and the loss of self. Into Aries, which is all about the self. So these are two very different feelings. From Pisces to Aries is a big move, you know? It's always a big move between signs, but I think with some there's more symmetry. But Pisces to Aries, boom, boom, you know? These are two signs which, one of the things they share is being kind hypersensitive sometimes, but essentially they have very different feelings. You know, they have a different feel to them. So Chiron moves back and forth between these two, and the last time that Chiron did this, there were 2 times. I just looked back 100 years. I didn't want to go through the whole history of everything. 1918, so end of the First World War, when people were, the First World War, Chiron had been in Pisces, so there had been exsanguination, bloodletting, a bloodletting across Europe. And Chiron goes into Aries, and you get this hedonism thing. I'm me, I'm going to experience me being myself. And the pain had been this terrible collective pain. I wonder also if Chiron and Pisces is particularly bad, you know, because although we're all here, if you think about some of the wars that have been going on in the last 7 years, it's been bad, really bad. You know, it's been terrible. Burma, you know, there have been very terrible things that are generationally bad that will be talked about in 300 years when people talk about the history of me, of my place, of my people. Okay, so that's actually quite good. It's coming to the end of this. And then the next time that Chiron was whizzing back and forth between Aries and Pisces was 1968. God, that's interesting. Because everybody knows that 1968 was a really massively important year, especially for us Westerners maybe, but for a lot of people, but you know, culturally and politically, etc. Yeah, it's a huge year. And I was thinking, well, okay, we can pick any year and say, oh, well, it's this, you know, because history doesn't repeat itself. We can't say it's literally like this. It's because Chiron was in Pisces. So you have to look back and ask yourself, well, what was the Chiron-y stuff? What was that? What was going on? This was a really turbulent year, and I think that this is one of the things that you can say about Chiron's move from Pisces to Aries. This is turbulence. Yeah, turbulence. And also with the Uranus in Taurus, we're going to experience turbulence. Indeed, you know, with Uranus and Taurus, we might actually literally have earthquakes. You know, it's that kind of level of turbulence. So, which is an interesting contrast to the other stuff that I was talking about earlier. But it's so I just to remind people of what happened actually in 1968 was the Prague Spring. The Tet Offensive in Vietnam. So the biggest offensive in Vietnam was that year. Student uprisings in Paris. And we still talk about the 68ers, you know, the 68ers in France. That's who's spoken about when they talk about the hippie thing.
I was there when it happened.
And yet,
I was living there when it happened.
Were you throwing stones and holding placards?
No, I wasn't, because I worked in an office. When the electricity closed down, there was no petrol, there was nothing. So I and a group of others, we escaped to Germany. We had to siphon the petrol out of one car into another. We couldn't even buy any petrol. It was horrible.
Wow.
I was relieved to get to Germany and not be in the middle of all that. I saw all the burnt cars and all that kind of thing.
Well, there you are. So it was right, it was in the streets. Okay, there was a few more things I just want to mention. Martin Luther King was murdered.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bobby Kennedy was murdered.
Yeah.
Both were shot in the head. This is why I bring it up, which is which is an Aries thing.
Yeah.
Okay, Chiron and Aries. Where's the pain? The pain is in my head. Okay. Furthermore, when Martin Luther King was shot, Chiron was at 0 Aries. Okay, so we're seeing disruption. And when I looked at this, and most of the kind of violence of that year, 68, was when Chiron was in Aries, not Pisces. Okay, so goes into Aries, all this stuff breaks out, goes back into Pisces, like, ugh, you know. Not that Chiron in Pisces is not violent, as we know from the First World War, but it's like Chiron goes into Aries, and the focus shifts also to actually standing, to doing stuff, you know, to going out into the streets and tearing up the pavement. I'm just thinking of Danny LaRouche, you know, that Danny, what's his cone down?
Bended.
Yeah. Oh, the Rodney riots in Jamaica, and the troubles began in Northern Ireland, okay? That is a Chironic situation, that thing, Northern Irish thing. And it's coming again, you know, if we're not careful. Why is it a Chironic? There's something about about Ireland that has a feeling of kind of sacrifice, of the victimization, okay? And this is one of the things about Chiron is, are you going to let yourself feel like a victim when you have this pain, or are you going to not? And the thing is, you can't do that.
No.
But you can when you have Chiron in Aries, you can be a warrior for victims, okay? Now the reason I bring that up is because there are some really famous people, for example Mahatma Gandhi and Malcolm X, who they're warriors for the underdog. And that's what Chiron in Aries seems to do best. You know, when we were born with that, that's what you go out and do. And when it comes in, when Chiron comes into Aries, it's either this crazy hedonism thing, but about personal experience, but it's about turning that personal into a collective experience, or turning the collective into a personal. So it's getting that weaving back and forth going on. He also had Chiron in Aries. Okay, so this is Chiron in Aries, just so you know, 1919 to 1926, 1969 to 1976. And I would characterize both those periods as me, you know, they talked about the me generation in this early 70s. They also talked about, it was the me generation at that point as well, in the 20s, it's the flappers. It really is the flappers. And it's kind of as a response to what's gone before. Okay, why did I put Douglas Fairbanks Jr.? Oh, because that was the other thing that Chiron does, is that he trains heroes. He trains heresies. But I thought maybe Aries is the sign of the hero, to a certain extent. Aries, Leo, you know, this is a heroic sign. It's the sign of Mars, etc. And I thought, well, what superheroes were started, you know, under Chiron and Aries? And I was delighted to see that Zorro, one of my favorite ones, was launched at the beginning of Chiron and Aries. And he is, of course, Zorro is, if you're keen on these things, Zorro is a fighter for the underdog. In the 1970s, of course, it was all Wonder Woman, Bionic Man.
Superman?
No, Bionic Woman, not Superman. Well, that was done, but the things that started were the $6 Million Man,
6 million,
Wonder Woman was relaunched, and the Bionic Woman, which actually fits in with this Uranus and Taurus idea that we're going to be cyborgs, essentially. And that is coming too, that this, one of the other things about Chiron, but this is why it's such a weird asteroid, is that it's something to do with not being completely human. And I'm not sure quite what to put my finger on with that, but I think that this might become more physically evident with Chiron and Aries, and it's to do with having bits. You know, we don't have our bits of bone that's already, we're all part. It's happened already, but it will become much more evident. People will be having implants next.
Do you know another interesting thing? You say 1969, 76. In Italy, it was the slaughters. And that went on for that number of years.
This was an incredibly violent period.
I
looked this up, you know, to death rates, and I thought, oh, it's going to be all in the 60s. Well, there is a lot in the 60s. Actually, this was the violent period. This was, I think, Pol Pot was 76, 75. You look at number of deaths through violence, and it goes at this point.
You also had the Greek Turk,
which was very violent. So why are we talking about violence? Well, because it's Aries, right? This is the sign of the warrior. And it's the sign of blood, of spilled blood. However,
is that in isolation, or when you talk about Chiron, you know, in each one now in Aries, but is that in isolation? How do the other planets
Oh
reflect
yeah,
on.
that's one of the things that's different each time.
Right, yeah.
You know, you can't so
Okay.
you can't say it's just the Chiron and Aries.
No.
You know, that's what
Yeah.
I was trying to
Yeah.
explain at the beginning. You can't do that because that
No.
would be silly.
Yeah,
That's why I was trying to find the Chiron
Yeah.
things, like
Yeah.
being shot in the head.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that is
And
that
this.
and this
Yes,
pain,
Yes.
experiencing pain.
Christine,
Yeah.
we had the Pluto-Uranus conjunction
Yeah,
in the late 60s.
in the mid-60s,
Yeah.
66.
Yeah.
Well, even
Up
before
to
that,
68,
62 to 69. You know, basically, it was the whole of the 1960s. It's overshadowed by the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, which is opposite Chiron. Okay,
right.
for the whole time. It was just, I was thinking about this Chiron and Pisces, and I was thinking, well, what does this mean? You know, what's happened? What's the same as the 60s? What is Chiron? Chiron is, of course, medical stuff. Who was Chiron? Chiron was a doctor, a teacher. He taught heroes, but he taught them medicine and, you know, as well as thinking and astrology, allegedly. So medical, I thought, oh, well, look at medical breakthroughs, but it wasn't that, Chiron and Pisces. What really is noticeable about what's been happening in the last few years and the 1960s is medical. It's the same as the opioid crisis that we're having, okay? It's, we have, and I was looking at graphs of the opioid crisis thinking, you know, is this true? Yes, it's like that. It's really serious. And of course in the 60s there was a lot of experimentation, and there's a good side and a bad side of this. You know, these doors of perception were opened, and the doors of perception are being opened again. You know, a lot of people are experimenting with ayahuasca and whatever. So the doors of perception are being opened, but there are casualties in this, really badly. And the level of, well, first of all, suicide, drug overdose is now the biggest accidental cause of death in the United States. Okay? That is completely changed. It used to be crashing your car. So it's to do with experimenting, as I was saying. Chiron is experimenting with drugs, which is Pisces. So Pisces love to get out of it. Yeah. Yeah, and there's particular kinds of marijuana as well. Yes.
Aren't a lot of those prescribed drugs causing this
They are.
crisis?
What happens is that you're prescribed these opioids, then you can't get them, and they're too expensive, then you find heroin.
Or get them on the internet.
Yeah, yeah. It's really serious. You know, it's and when you think of it in terms of Pisces-ishness, this is self-loss. That's what Pisces loves to do.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you because we have the usual Pisces thing going on. I'm looking at the Pisces in the room. We like to lose ourselves. You know, we like to be watching we like to drink gin and watch box sets. Please, thank you very much. And if we can't do that, we'll be, you know, completely out of it. Reality is too hard. Especially if you, and the reason, the Chironic side of this is that there's also this idea of self-sacrifice and self-harm. Experiment, self-sacrifice, self-harm. So it became very clear, you know, when you look at statistics, that's clearly a Chironic thing that's happening, and that's not finished, okay? So this crisis isn't over, it's reaching some kind of critical ending, and then when Chiron moves to Aries, it'll be interesting to see what happens, how that changes. But then you have to remember that, of course, the 1920s were famous for drugs. Yeah, back to this hedonism thing. And for experimenting on yourself, different drugs, mind you, not out-of-it drugs, not not the kind that anesthetizes the self, which of course that's the Pisces kind. The Aries kind of drug is, of course, the kind of speed. Yeah, cocaine, that's what people did in the 1920s. And of course, the 1970s, what happened? Cocaine came in.
I wonder about guns and weapons as well in Aries.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Well, I don't know. We could, you know, how much more guns can we have? You know what I mean? But I would say that's very speedy. Something that you're taking, some medicine that you're taking that speeds you up, or some drug.
Wouldn't it be squaring Saturn?
When it's in Aries, yeah, it will be squaring Saturn. There may be legislation about it or limiting. Yeah, and that's an interesting thing that we're coming to, actually, is what happens when you start sticking these planets together. But there's another thing. I'm moving on from Chiron, okay? But just to keep that in your mind, this turbulence around drugs, experimentation, self, etc., is going on in the background all year into 2019.